My name is Emily. I'm 27 years old, and for 10 years, my sister treated me like a trespasser in our own family. I kept telling myself it was just sibling rivalry, that eventually she would see how hard I worked. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came at my mother's funeral. She leaned over the mahogany casket, 60 grieving guests standing right behind us, and slipped a folded eviction notice into my hand. "This property belongs to me now," she whispered. "Pack up." My aunt pressed a hand to her mouth. The pastor stopped mid-sentence. "I paid the mortgage when Mom got sick. I spent my 20s changing IVs and keeping the lights on. I kept that house standing, and my sister was erasing me from the only place that had still felt like mine. I thought I was going to lose everything. I was wrong. She thought she had already won. She had no idea what I had locked in my car glove box, signed and notarized 48 hours before Mom died. What happens next won't just tear up that notice. It's going to destroy her perfect image and split this family permanently. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to 6 months before the funeral. 6 months before the funeral, the air in my mother's house smelled like antiseptic and fading lavender. I was 27, but I felt 50. My life had narrowed down to the dimensions of a hospital bed and the timing of a morphine drip. I was working double shifts at the medical billing office just to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. My manager let me take my lunch breaks at home so I could change Mom's IV bags and help her into a fresh gown. It was a cycle of exhaustion. I'd work from 8 to 1, drive like a maniac to get home, handle the nursing duties, and then drive back to work until 7. My social life was a stack of unpaid invoices and the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floors. I didn't mind the work. I loved my mother. But I was the only one holding the ceiling up, and everyone in the family acted like that was just the natural order of things. The family rule was established 5 years ago, right after my father died. Dad didn't leave much besides the house and a small life insurance policy that Mom burned through in the first year of her illness. When the medical bills started piling up, a family meeting was called. My sister, Sarah, sat at the head of the table. She was 3 years older and lived in a pristine suburb 2 towns over. "Emily is single," Sarah had said, adjusted her designer watch. "She doesn't have kids or a husband to worry about. It just makes sense for her to live with Mom and handle the day-to-day. I have a family to prioritize. I have a mortgage of my own." My mother sat there and nodded. She didn't look at me. She just looked at Sarah with that soft, adoring gaze she always reserved for her golden child. Sarah was the success. She was the one who married the lawyer and posted the Christmas cards that looked like they belonged in a magazine. I was just Emily. I was reliable. In my family, being reliable was just a polite way of saying you were a beast of burden. I became the caregiver by default. I became the bank by necessity. Whenever I brought up the cost of the specialized bed or the high-protein shakes Mom needed, Sarah would sigh. "We all have to make sacrifices, Emily," she'd say over the phone while I could hear her dishwasher running in the background. "You're living there rent-free. The least you can do is cover the utilities and the grocery bill. Consider it your contribution to the estate." Rent-free. That was the phrase she used. She ignored the fact that I spent my entire salary on the mortgage and the private nurses I had to hire when I couldn't get off work. She ignored the fact that I was the one waking up at 3:00 a.m. to turn Mom over so she wouldn't get bed sores. I remember one Tuesday in particular. Mom was having a bad day. Her breathing was ragged and the house felt heavy. Sarah pulled into the driveway in her white SUV. She didn't come in through the back door like I did. She knocked on the front door like a guest. She walked into the sick room wearing a perfectly tailored wool coat. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She didn't ask if the pharmacy had delivered the new meds. She walked straight to Mom's bedside, smoothed her hair, and pulled out her phone. "Smile, Mom," Sarah whispered. The flash went off. Mom gave a weak, confused smile. Sarah spent the next 10 minutes typing a caption about the heartbreak of the long goodbye and the strength of daughterhood. She tagged a local hospice charity. Then she stood up and checked her watch. "I have to get back," she said. "The kids have soccer and I'm hosting the PTA mixer tonight. You've got this, right? The house looks a little dusty, Em. Maybe try to run the vacuum later. It's important for Mom's spirits." She left a pile of her own dry cleaning on the kitchen counter, asking if I could drop it off for her on my way to work the next morning since the good cleaner was near my office. She didn't offer a dime for the groceries I'd just bought. She didn't even stay long enough to see me change the soiled linens. That was the pattern. Sarah provided the image. I provided the labor. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, looking at my bank balance. I had $84 left to last me until Friday. The mortgage was due on Thursday. I had already dipped into my tiny 401k to pay for the last round of labs. I felt like a tenant who was paying for the privilege of being a servant. I looked at the photo Sarah had posted. It already had 200 likes. Our Aunt Martha had commented, "Sarah, you are such an angel for looking after your mother like this. She's so lucky to have you." I put my phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't comment. I didn't correct her. I just went back into the hallway to check the IV bag. That was the first time I felt the shift. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was starting to see the trap Sarah was building. To the world, she was the grieving saint. To me, she was a predator waiting for the heart to stop beating. I realized then that in my family, the truth didn't matter as much as the story. And Sarah was a very good storyteller. I was just the character she used to keep the background clean. I kept working. I kept paying. I kept my mouth shut. I thought that if I did everything right, if I was the perfect daughter, the truth would eventually come out on its own. I was wrong about that. The truth doesn't just come out. Sometimes you have to drag it into the light, even if it happens over a casket. The first undeniable cost didn't come in a single blow. It leaked out of my life like water from a cracked pipe until I was standing in a flood. By the 4th month of Mom's intensive care, I was drowning. My manager at the billing office, a woman named Sheila who usually had a heart of stone, called me into her glass-walled cubicle. She didn't look at me, she looked at my time card. "Emily, you've missed 16 hours this week," she said. "And the errors on the coding for the Thompson account, that's not like you." "My mom's meds changed," I said. My voice sounded thin, even to me. "I had to stay to monitor her blood pressure. I'm sorry, I'll stay late tonight." "You can't stay late tonight," Sheila replied, finally looking up. "The building closes at 6. We're a business, not a charity. I'm moving you to part-time, effective immediately. We need someone in that chair who is actually in that chair." I walked out of her office feeling like the floor had been pulled out from under me. Part-time meant no benefits. It meant my paycheck was about to be cut by 40%. It meant the mortgage was no longer a struggle, it was an impossibility. I drove home in a daze. I needed to check the mail. I needed to see the damage. The stack on the kitchen counter was terrifying. Yellow notices, pink notices. And there at the bottom was the one I had been dreading, a formal notice of arrears from the bank. We were 3 months behind. If I didn't come up with $4,000 by the end of the month, the foreclosure process would start. I went into Mom's room. She was asleep, her face pale against the white pillowcase. I sat at her small mahogany desk, the one she used to use for her stationery, and started looking for her checkbook. I knew she had a savings account. It was the rainy day fund Dad had left her. It wasn't huge, maybe $12,000, but it was enough to save the house. I found the ledger in the bottom drawer. I opened it, expecting to see a steady balance. The balance was 0. There had been 3 large withdrawals over the last 2 months. $5,000, 4,000. 3,000. The last one had happened only 12 days ago. I felt a cold prickle of sweat on the back of my neck. Mom couldn't get to the bank. She couldn't even get to the bathroom without help. Someone had used her power of attorney. I called Sarah. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the bright, artificial chirping of a luxury lifestyle in the background. "Hey, Em," she said. "Is everything okay? I'm right in the middle of picking out backsplash tile. Everything is so overpriced these days." "The savings account is empty, Sarah," I said. I didn't lead with a greeting. I didn't have the energy for the dance. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice today. Where is Mom's money?" There was a silence on the other end, not a shocked silence, but a calculated one. I could almost hear her shifting gears. "Oh, that," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a tone of patronizing concern. "I was going to tell you. Mom and I talked about it. She wanted to help me with the kitchen renovation. You know how much she loves my house, Em. She said it was her way of investing in the family's future. Investing in a backsplash while she's dying in a house we're about to lose," I screamed. I rarely raised my voice, but the walls felt like they were closing in. "The mortgage is in arrears. I just got demoted to part-time because I'm doing all the nursing work you won't touch. We need that money to keep her in her bed." "Don't be dramatic," Sarah snapped. The sweet sister mask slipped, revealing the steel underneath. "You're living there for free, Emily. You have a job. If you can't manage a simple budget, that's on you. Mom gave me that money. It's a gift. You aren't entitled to her assets just because you're the one who stayed behind." "She's in the next room, Sarah. She can't even hold a pen." "She signed the transfer forms months ago before she got really bad," Sarah said coldly. "Check the dates if you don't believe me. And honestly, Emily, look at the big picture. That house is a money pit. Maybe foreclosure is the universe telling you it's time to move on. Once Mom passes, we were going to sell it anyway. Why pour more money into a sinking ship?" That was the moment I realized my sister didn't just want the money. She wanted the house to fail. She wanted the estate liquidated so she could get her half of the wood and dirt without having to deal with the burden of a living mother. I hung up. I didn't have anything else to say. I went back to the ledger. I looked at the dates. Sarah was right. The forms had been signed months ago, likely tucked into a pile of medical paperwork Sarah had brought over for Mom to sign while I was at work. Mom would have signed anything Sarah put in front of her. She trusted the golden child. I looked at my mother, sleeping fitfully in the bed I had bought with my own credit card. I was the one who fed her. I was the one who cleaned her. And my sister had just robbed her of her last safety net to buy a designer kitchen. That was the second lie. Sarah didn't care about the family's future. She only cared about her own. I walked to the kitchen and made a pot of tea. My hands were shaking so hard the spoon rattled against the ceramic. I didn't have the $4,000. I didn't have a full-time job. I had a sister who was actively picking the pockets of a dying woman. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting a war I didn't know I was in. Sarah had already started her move. She had the money. She had the public sympathy. And now she had the momentum. I looked at the yellow notice from the bank. I wasn't going to let her take the house. I didn't know how I was going to stop her, but I knew I couldn't just be reliable anymore. Reliable was getting me buried alive. That was the night I stopped crying and started looking for a way out. The harm didn't stay inside the house. It started bleeding into my reputation. A few days after the bank notice arrived, I went to the local grocery store. It was the only one in town, the kind of place where people lean on their carts to trade news. I ran into Mrs. Gable, a longtime friend of my mother, S. Usually she'd give me a hug and ask how the garden was doing. This time she stiffened. She looked at my hand on the handle of the cart, then looked away. "Hard times for the family, Emily," she said. Her voice was brittle. "I heard about the financial struggles. Sarah is just devastated that the house is falling apart under your watch. She says you're overwhelmed." I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I'm doing my best, Mrs. Gable. The medical bills are. Well, she interrupted, patting her hair. Sarah told us you were having trouble managing the household budget. She's such a dear, trying to help from afar while raising those beautiful children. It's a lot for her to carry, worrying about her mother's legacy being lost. She walked away before I could explain that the household budget was being used to fund Sarah's new marble countertops. I stood in the cereal aisle, my chest tight. Sarah wasn't just stealing the money, she was preemptively poisoning the well. She was making sure that when the house eventually went under, the town would blame my incompetence, not her greed. The reality of the burden logic was becoming a physical weight. Every time I looked at the mortgage statement, I saw Sarah's kitchen. Every time I had to skip a meal to buy Mom's specialized gauze, I saw the selfies Sarah posted of her family at expensive Sunday brunches. The injustice was concrete. My sister was benefiting from my labor and my mother's silence. She was building her perfect life on the foundation of my exhaustion. One afternoon, a man in a navy polo shirt knocked on the door. He had a clipboard and a professional, detached smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, shielding the view of the hospital bed in the living room. "Just doing a preliminary assessment for the listing," he said. "Sarah Miller called, said we should get a head start on the appraisal so we can hit the market the moment the situation changes." He looked past me, his eyes landing on the medical equipment. He didn't see a home. He saw a distressed property with a high profit margin. "The situation hasn't changed," I said, my voice shaking. "And my sister doesn't own this house. My mother does." "She said she had power of attorney," the man replied, tapping his clipboard. "She said you were just a temporary occupant helping out. Look, I'm just doing my job. She wants a number by Friday." I closed the door on him. I didn't even lock it. I just leaned my forehead against the wood. My sister was already selling the roof over our mother's head while our mother was still breathing under it. She was treating the estate like a lottery win she'd already cashed. I went back into the room. Mom was awake. She looked smaller every day, like she was slowly folding into herself. "Who was that, Em?" she whispered. "Just a salesman, Mom. Go back to sleep." I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her that her favorite daughter was measuring the square footage for a for sale sign. It would have killed her faster than the illness. That evening, I tried one last time. I called Sarah and begged. I didn't lead with anger, I led with the house. "Sarah, please, the bank is going to start the legal process in 10 days. If you could just return half of what you took from the savings, I can catch us up. I'll work triple shifts, I'll pay you back, just don't let them take the house from Mom. She wants to die here, she told me she wants to be in her own bed." "Emily, stop being so theatrical," Sarah sighed. I could hear her sipping something, the clink of ice against glass. "Mom is barely conscious. She won't know if she's in that drafty old house or a nice, clean facility. And honestly, it's selfish of you to keep her there just so you have a place to stay. You're using her illness to justify your own lack of ambition." "I'm staying here to take care of her." "You're staying there because you have nowhere else to go," Sarah countered. "Let the house go, Emily. It's the smart financial move. Once it's sold, we'll split the equity, what's left of it after your mismanagement, and you can finally get a little apartment of your own. Isn't that what you want? Independence." She said the word like it was a gift she was offering me, rather than a displacement she was forcing. "I'm not leaving her," I said. "Then you'll go down with the ship," Sarah said. "But don't expect me to throw you a life jacket when the water hits your chin. I've already done my part. I've looked into the best local assisted living for her. It's very modern, they have activities." She had it all planned. The house would be sold, the money would be hers, and Mom would be tucked away in a sterile room until the end. I would be out on the street with a mismanagement reputation that would follow me to every job interview in town. I looked at the mortgage notice again. I had 10 days. That was the night the fear turned into something colder. My sister thought she was playing a game of checkers. She thought I was just a piece she could move off the board whenever she got bored. She didn't realize I was the one holding the board up. I stopped arguing. I stopped begging. I realized that as long as I was the reliable one, I was playing by her rules. And in her rules, I was always the loser. I needed a different set of rules. The poison didn't stay contained within the town's gossip circles. It spilled over into the one place I thought was safe, my professional life. 2 weeks before the mortgage deadline, I was sitting in my tiny cubicle at the billing office, trying to process a stack of insurance claims. My eyes were burning from lack of sleep. The phone on my desk rang. It was the human resources director, a woman named Mrs. Gable, no relation to the gossip at the grocery store, but just as cold. "Emily, could you come to my office? Bring your personal belongings." That sentence is a death sentence in the corporate world. I walked down the hall, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I entered, Mrs. Gable wasn't alone. Our regional director was there on a video screen. "We've received some concerning information," the regional director said. His voice was pixelated and distorted. "An anonymous tip suggested that you've been using company time to manage private real estate dealings, and that your family situation has led to a misuse of company resources. Specifically, that you've been using the office scanner and long-distance lines for personal legal matters." I scanned one document for my mother's doctor," I stammered. "And I've only taken calls during my lunch break. The tip also mentioned that the house you're living in is currently in foreclosure due to financial mismanagement," Mrs. Gable added, looking at me over her glasses. "Given that you handle sensitive medical billing and financial data, we have to consider the character risk of our employees. We can't have someone in deep financial turmoil handling our clients' money. It's a liability." I knew exactly where the anonymous tip had come from. Sarah knew the regional director's wife from her country club. She had whispered a few concerned words into the right ear, and now my livelihood was being dismantled. "I'm being let go because my mother is sick and my sister is a liar?" I asked. My voice didn't shake this time, it was flat. "You're being let go because you're no longer a fit for the company culture," Mrs. Gable said. She pushed a severance agreement across the desk. It was for 2 weeks' pay. "Sign this and we won't contest your unemployment." I didn't sign it. I just stood up and walked out. I didn't even take my coffee mug. The story was getting bigger. It wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a systematic erasure of my life. Sarah was stripping away my income, my reputation, and my sanity piece by piece. She wanted me so broken and so broke that I wouldn't have the strength to fight her when she finally came for the deed. When I got home, there was a message on the machine. It was my Aunt Martha. "Emily, I'm just so disappointed." Her voice crackled through the speaker. "Sarah told me you lost your job because you were stealing time from the office. And now I hear the bank is taking the house. How could you be so selfish? Your mother deserves better than to spend her last days in a place that's being repossessed because you couldn't keep your head on straight. Sarah is the only one trying to save what's left of our name. You should apologize to her." I deleted the message. Then I sat on the floor of the hallway and listened to the rhythmic hum of my mother's oxygen concentrator. The spillover was complete. My sister had successfully rebranded my sacrifice as theft. She had turned my grief into a character risk. She was winning because she was playing in the arena of public opinion, and I was playing in the arena of reality. I looked at the house. The paint was peeling. The porch light was flickering. It looked exactly how I felt, haunted and failing. But then I heard a small cough from the bedroom. I went in and found my mother looking at the window. The sun was hitting the glass, throwing a square of light across her blanket. She whispered. "Is it Tuesday?" "Yes, Mom, it's Tuesday." "The garden needs watering," she said. Her mind was drifting, but her heart was still in this dirt. "Don't let the roses die, Emily. Your father planted those for me. I won't let them die, Mom, I promised. I realized then that Sarah didn't just want the house for the money. She wanted it because it was the only thing I had left that she couldn't put a filter on. She wanted to prove that even my love for our mother was a failure. That was the night I stopped being a victim and started being a witness. I realized that if Sarah was going to use the world against me, I had to find a part of the world she didn't control. The story was no longer about a mortgage. It was about survival. And for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the foreclosure sign. I was afraid of what I would become if I didn't fight back. I stayed awake all night, writing down every cent I'd spent, every hour I'd worked, and every lie Sarah had told. I had no job. I had no money. I had no support from my family. But I had the truth. And I was starting to realize that the truth is a very different kind of leverage than a backsplash tile. 48 hours before my mother passed, the house went quiet in a way I hadn't heard in months. The machines were still humming, but the tension seemed to break. It was a Tuesday evening just after sunset. I was sitting by her bed, holding her hand, which felt as light and fragile as a dried leaf. Suddenly, her eyes opened. They weren't cloudy or distant, they were sharp. "Emily," she whispered. Her voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. "The drawer, the small mahogany desk." "I'm here, Mom, don't worry about the desk." "The false bottom," she insisted, her fingers twitching against mine. "The key is behind the frame of your father's portrait. Get it, now." I did as she asked, my heart racing. Behind the silver frame of Dad's construction site photo, I found a tiny brass key. I opened the desk drawer, felt for the seam, and popped the false bottom. Inside was a single manila envelope. I brought it to her. She didn't have the strength to hold it, so I opened it for her. It was a series of bank statements, accounts I didn't recognize, and a handwritten letter from my father dated just before he died. "She's been taking it, hasn't she?" Mom asked. She didn't say Sarah's name, she didn't have to. I knew, I saw her face when she thought I was sleeping. She thinks I'm already gone. "Mom, it doesn't matter now, just rest." "It matters," she said, a flash of the woman she used to be returning to her eyes. "She wants to throw you out. She told me the house was a burden to you. She told me you wanted to leave me. She's waiting for me to close my eyes so she can take the only place you have." I couldn't lie to her anymore. I told her about the foreclosure notice. I told her about the empty savings. I told her about the job. Tears tracked down her face, but she didn't look defeated. She looked resolved. "Call Sarah," she commanded. "Mom, not Sarah, call Chloe." Chloe was my best friend from high school. We hadn't spoken much lately because I'd been so buried in caregiving, but Chloe was more than a friend. She was a mobile notary and a paralegal. "She's coming," I said after a quick, frantic phone call. Chloe arrived 30 minutes later, her professional bag over her shoulder and a look of grim determination on her face. She didn't ask for small talk. She saw the state of the room, saw the medicine bottles, and saw the look in my mother's eyes. "Mrs. Miller," Chloe said softly, kneeling by the bed. "Emily told me what's happening. Are you sure about this? You're of sound mind and acting of your own free will." "I have never been surer of anything," my mother said. She looked at me, then back at Chloe. "My oldest daughter has already taken her inheritance in cash and lies. This house belongs to the daughter who stayed, the one who did the work." The support didn't feel like a victory yet. It felt like a heavy responsibility. Chloe pulled out a document, a quitclaim deed she had drafted on the drive over based on the property records. This wasn't a suggestion or a request in a will that could be contested for years in probate. This was a transfer of title, effective immediately upon signing and recording. "If we do this," Chloe whispered to me while Mom rested for a second, "Sarah will lose her mind. She'll claim undue influence. She'll say you forced her." "I have the medical logs," I said. "I have the receipts for every cent I spent. I have the bank statements showing Sarah's withdrawals. Let her try." The room felt different then. The reliable sister wasn't alone anymore. I had a witness. I had a professional. I had the clarity that comes when the person you're protecting finally sees the person you're protecting them from. Mom signed the paper with a shaking hand. Chloe stamped it, the heavy click of the notary seal sounding like a gavel in the quiet room. "It's done," Chloe said, tucking the original into a waterproof sleeve. "Emily, put this in your car. Not in the house, in the car, in the glove box, locked." "Why?" "Because if Sarah finds this before it's recorded, it'll disappear," Chloe said. "And right now, this piece of paper is the only thing standing between you and the sidewalk." I walked Chloe to the door. The night air was cold, but for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. I went to my beat-up sedan, locked the envelope in the glove box, and leaned against the steering wheel. I wasn't a tenant anymore. I wasn't a character risk. I was the owner. I went back inside and sat with Mom. She didn't speak again that night. She just held my hand until she drifted off. She had given me the leverage I needed, not out of spite for Sarah, but out of justice for the truth. I knew what was coming. I knew the funeral would be the stage Sarah chose for her final act. But as I watched the moonlight hit the roses Dad had planted, I realized Sarah was no longer the one writing the script. She thought she was the lead. She didn't realize she was about to be the cautionary tale. The leverage was now a physical weight in my glove box, but it didn't change the immediate reality of the house. The machines kept humming, and Sarah kept preening. In the final 48 hours, Sarah's behavior shifted from passive-aggressive to openly managerial. She didn't come to sit by the bed. She didn't come to hold Mom's hand. She came with a folder full of transition documents. She spent 3 hours in the kitchen on her laptop, her voice drifting down the hallway as she coordinated with the funeral home and the real estate agent she'd already unofficially hired. "I want the viewing to be open casket mahogany," I heard her say into her phone. "And tell the florist I want white lilies. Lots of them. It needs to look dignified. The community will be there." She was planning a stage production, not a goodbye. I sat in the room with Mom, watching the light change on the wall. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I had the deed, but I was still the one measuring out the final doses of comfort. I was still the one who had to tell the hospice nurse that we were out of the good sponges. Sarah didn't care about the sponges. She cared about the community. When the end finally came, it was quiet. It was just me and the sound of the wind in the eaves. Sarah wasn't there. She was at a pre-planning meeting with the pastor to ensure the eulogy hit all the right notes about her devotion. The moment the hospice nurse pronounced the time of death, the trap Sarah had built snapped shut. Within 2 hours, Sarah was at the front door. She didn't hug me. She didn't cry. She handed me a cup of lukewarm coffee she'd picked up on the way. "It's over, Emily," she said. Her eyes were already scanning the living room, probably calculating where to put the staging furniture. "You've done a good job, really. But now we need to be practical. I've already called the estate attorney. Since I have the power of attorney and there's no formal will." "There is the estate, Sarah," I said. "Exactly. And as the eldest, it's my responsibility to handle the liquidation. The bank is already breathing down our necks about the foreclosure. I've reached an agreement with them to pause the proceedings if we list the house by Monday." "You reached an agreement. I'm the one with the credit score, M," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, pitying tone. "The bank doesn't talk to part-time billing clerks with no assets. They talk to people like me. I'm saving what's left of Mom's equity. You should be thanking me." She reached out to pat my shoulder, but I stepped back. "I'm not moving out yet, Sarah." "You have a week," she said, her smile disappearing. "After the funeral, I'm changing the locks. I've already rented a storage unit for your things. Don't make this difficult. The house is going on the market, and you're a liability." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't a grieving daughter. She was a CEO finishing a merger. She had no idea that her power of attorney died the second Mom's heart stopped. She had no idea that the liquidation she was planning was for a property she didn't own. I didn't tell her. I let her keep talking. I let her feel the rush of her own victory. Every word she said was another brick in the wall she was building around herself. The leverage was real now. It was usable. I could have ended it then, in the kitchen, over the lukewarm coffee. But I knew my sister. If I showed her the deed now, she'd spend the next 3 days calling every lawyer in the state trying to find a loophole to tie it up in court for years. She'd lie to the family, tell them I'd forged it while Mom was drugged, and she'd have 3 days to get the community on her side. No, to stop Sarah, I had to let her go all the way. I had to let her take the stage she had built. I had to let her think she had already won so that when the floor fell out, there would be no one to catch her. I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the glove box. I touched the seal on the envelope. It felt cold and hard. "I've got you, Mom," I whispered. The house was quiet, but for the first time it didn't feel heavy. It felt like it was waiting. Sarah was inside, probably labeling the furniture she wanted to keep. She thought she was claiming her prize. She didn't realize she was just trespassing. I drove to the bank the next morning. I didn't go to the teller window. I went to the manager's office with a copy of the deed and the death certificate. "I'm the sole owner of the property at 412 Maple," I told the manager. "The arrears will be paid in full by the end of the month. I'm taking out a small equity loan to cover the medical debt. Here is the recorded title." The manager looked at the paperwork, then at me. He saw the dark circles under my eyes, but he also saw the notarized seal of the county recorder. "Everything seems to be in order, Ms. Miller," he said. "The foreclosure process is halted. The house is yours." I walked out of the bank feeling light. Sarah had spent months trying to drown me, and I had just walked onto dry land. The leverage was ready. The countdown had started. Sarah spent the next 2 days calling the family, making sure everyone knew how difficult I was being about the move. She was setting the scene for a public tragedy where she was the hero and I was the squatter. I just stayed in my room, packing the things I actually wanted, Mom's old journals, Dad's tools, and waited for the funeral. The stage was set. 60 guests, one casket, and one folded piece of paper that was about to turn Sarah's perfect image into a pile of ash. The countdown began the moment the funeral director closed the heavy lid of the casket for the final viewing. I had exactly 3 days until the public service. 3 days to let Sarah finish building her own gallows. Logistically, I moved like a shadow. I didn't tell Sarah I had been to the bank. I didn't tell her the foreclosure was halted. Instead, I let her see me packing small cardboard boxes. I left a few of them stacked prominently in the hallway where she couldn't miss them. "Good," she said, walking past them on Thursday morning. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing a black silk dress that cost more than my monthly car payment. "I've scheduled the cleaners for Monday morning. You'll need to be fully out by Sunday night. I don't want the real estate agent smelling, well, the lingering scent of illness." I didn't flinch. "I'll be ready, Sarah." "I hope so," she said, tapping her pen against her chin. "Aunt Martha and the cousins are coming back to the house after the service for a remembrance tea. It would be very embarrassing if your junk was still cluttering up the living room." That was her emotional move. She was using the family's presence as a deadline, a way to ensure I was gone before I could say a word to anyone. She wanted the house empty and staged while the family was still in town, so she could hand out inheritance updates over finger sandwiches. My risk move was the silence. Every time she insulted me, every time she referred to my home as the property, I swallowed the urge to pull the deed out of my pocket. The risk was that she might actually call the police to move me out early, or that the stress would break me before I reached the church. On Friday, the day before the funeral, Sarah brought the real estate agent back. They didn't even knock. They walked through the house while I was sitting in the kitchen. We'll knock this wall down, Sarah was saying, gesturing toward the pantry I'd painted myself 3 years ago. Open concept. That's what sells in this zip code. And the garden out back, we'll just sod over it. It's too much maintenance for a modern buyer. The agent, a man with a bleached white smile, nodded. You're making the right call, Sarah. It's a shame your sister let it get so run down, but with your vision, we'll get top dollar. I stood up and walked to the sink. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was the kind of tremors you get when you're holding back a landslide. The funeral is at 10 tomorrow, Sarah called out to me as they headed for the door. Make sure you're wearing something that doesn't look like you slept in it. People are going to be looking at us. We are the face of this family now. I'll be there, I said. I wouldn't miss it for the world. That night, the house felt cavernous. I sat on the floor of the empty living room. Sarah had already moved some of the smaller furniture out to her SUV. Antique lamps and silver sets she claimed were safer at her place. I let her take them. Let her accumulate the evidence of her theft. I went out to the car one last time. I checked the glove box. The envelope was there. I also tucked in the bank statements and the medical logs I'd kept, the ones that showed I paid for the roof repair, the nursing care, and the taxes while Sarah was withdrawing thousands for her investments. I looked at the house in the moonlight. Tomorrow, 60 people would gather to say goodbye to the woman who lived here. They would see a daughter in black silk weeping for the cameras. They would see a reliable, younger sister who had supposedly failed her mother. Sarah thought she was at the finish line. She thought she was about to step onto the podium and claim her gold medal. She had no idea that she was walking into a room where every seat was a witness stand. I went back inside and locked the door. For the last time, I used the key that Sarah thought she was going to take from me. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, watching the clock tick toward 10 o'clock. The countdown was over. The impact was coming. The morning of the funeral was gray and heavy. I didn't wear the cheap dress Sarah had criticized. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought with my first paycheck from the billing office. It was sharp, professional, and armor-plated. The church was full. 60 people sat in the pews, neighbors, old friends of my father, and the extended family who had spent the last week whispering about my instability. Sarah sat in the front row, a black lace veil draped over her face like she was royalty in mourning. She had a bottle of smelling salts in her clutch and a tissue she dabbed at her eyes every time she noticed someone looking. The service was a performance. The pastor spoke about Mom's devoted daughters and how Sarah had coordinated everything to ensure her mother's legacy was honored. Every time he praised her, Sarah would bow her head slightly, letting out a small, audible sob. Aunt Martha leaned over and squeezed Sarah's hand, then glared back at me in the third row. I was the cold one. I was the one who hadn't contributed. After the final prayer, the crowd moved toward the mahogany casket for the final goodbye. This was the moment Sarah had chosen. As I stood by the casket, looking down at my mother's peaceful face, I felt a hand on my arm. It wasn't a comfort, it was a grip. Sarah leaned in close. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. "Take it," she whispered. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. I'd seen the letterhead in her bag 2 days ago. It was the formal eviction notice drafted by her friend's law firm. "This property belongs to me now," she hissed under the cover of the organ music. "The locks are being changed at 4:00 p.m. Pack your things or they go to the curb. I'm done carrying you, Emily." I looked at the paper. Then I looked at her. Her eyes were bright with a cruel, triumphant energy. She thought she had delivered the killing blow in the one place I couldn't fight back, in front of the entire community over our mother's body. "Sarah," I said. My voice wasn't a whisper. It was a clear, steady bell. It carried through the front 5 rows. The organist had just stopped playing, and the silence that followed made my words land like stones in a pool. "Is this really the time? Don't make a scene," Sarah snapped, dabbing her eyes again for the benefit of Aunt Martha, who was watching. Just be a grown-up for once and accept that you failed. I didn't walk away. I didn't cry. I stepped toward the pulpit. Pastor, I said, before we head to the cemetery, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the estate. My sister just handed me an eviction notice. She wants me out of my home by 4 o'clock today. The room went deathly quiet. A woman in the second row dropped her program. Aunt Martha stood up, her face flushed. Emily, sit down, Martha hissed. Have some respect for your mother. I am respecting her, I said. I reached into my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the envelope Chloe had notarized. I didn't rush. I walked to the small table where the guest book sat and laid out the document. Sarah's face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. That's enough. She's had a breakdown, everyone. The stress of losing Mom. She's not herself. Emily, honey, let's go to the car. She moved to grab my arm, but I stepped back. This is a quitclaim deed, I said to the room. I looked at Mrs. Gable from the grocery store. I looked at the neighbors. Signed by our mother 48 hours before she passed, notarized by a licensed officer. It transfers the title of 412 Maple entirely to me. It's a forgery, Sarah screamed. The veil slipped from her head, dangling off one ear. The grieving daughter was gone. The predator was out. She forced her to sign it. Mom was out of her mind on morphine. I have the power of attorney. Your power of attorney ended the moment Mom died, Sarah, I said. And the notary is right here. Chloe stood up from the back of the room. She held up her logbook. I witnessed the signature. Mrs. Miller was fully lucid. She told me she wanted to protect Emily from exactly what is happening right now. The room erupted. It wasn't a loud noise, but a frantic, buzzing hum of 60 people recalculating everything they'd been told for 6 months. You're a thief! Sarah lunged for the paper, but the pastor stepped between us. He was a tall man, and he looked down at Sarah with a look of profound disappointment. Sarah, the pastor said, you handed your sister an eviction notice over your mother's casket. She was mismanaging the money, Sarah yelled. She turned to the crowd, her hands shaking. Ask anyone. She nearly lost the house to foreclosure. I was the one saving it. The bank manager is in the back row, Sarah, I said calmly. I pointed to the man in the navy suit who had helped me 2 days ago. He didn't say anything, he just nodded once. He knows the mortgage is paid. He knows who owns the deed. And he knows that the mismanaged money was actually the $12,000 you withdrew from Mom's savings for your kitchen. The silence that followed was different this time. It was heavy with the weight of a ruined reputation. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth with her hand. Aunt Martha sat back down slowly, looking at Sarah like she'd never seen her before. Sarah looked around the room. She looked for a friendly face, a supporter, someone to tell the reliable sister to get back in line. But she had played her hand too publicly. She had tried to use the funeral as a weapon, and the recoil had shattered her. I'll sue you, Sarah whispered. Her voice was trembling, but the iron was gone. I'll tie you up in court for 10 years. You won't have a penny left to fix a single shingle on that house. You can try, I said, but the medical logs are already with the estate attorney. Every withdrawal you made, every bill I paid while you were buying marble, it's all documented. If you want to go to court, Sarah, we can go. But we'll be talking about elder financial abuse, not just a deed. Sarah didn't have a comeback. She looked at the casket, then at the neighbors who were now whispering and pointing. She realized that the perfect image she had spent a decade building was gone. In 5 minutes, she had gone from the town's golden daughter to the woman who tried to evict her sister at a funeral. She didn't stay for the burial. She grabbed her designer clutch and ran out the side door of the church, her heels clicking frantically on the stone floor. Her husband followed her, looking down at his feet, his face red with shame. I stood there for a moment, the deed in my hand. I'm sorry, Pastor, I said softly. The pastor looked at me. He didn't look angry. He looked at the paper, then back at me. Don't be sorry, Emily. The truth is never a scene, it's just the truth. We went to the cemetery. The crowd was smaller, some people had left with Sarah, but the ones who stayed were different. They didn't look at me with pity or suspicion. They stayed back, giving me the space I had earned. Aunt Martha came up to me as the first shovelful of dirt hit the mahogany lid. She didn't look like the family matriarch anymore. She looked like an old woman who had been fooled. "I didn't know Emily," she said. "She told us such stories. I should have asked you." "You should have," I said, "but you didn't." I didn't give her a hug. I didn't offer her a way out of her guilt. I just turned and walked toward my car. The house was still standing. The mortgage was still paid. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't a guest in my own family. I was the one who held the keys. The morning after the funeral, the world felt strange. There was no rhythmic hum of an oxygen concentrator, no medicine schedule taped to the fridge, and no looming threat of an eviction. The silence was absolute. I drove to the county recorder's office at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I sat in a plastic chair, clutching a folder of documents, and watched as the clerk stamped the original deed. It was a small, clerical sound, but to me it sounded like a lock clicking into place. The house was legally, unassailably mine. The fallout in the family was swift. Sarah tried to call me once that afternoon, her voice high and erratic on the voicemail. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask how I was. She told me I was destroying the family and that she was already talking to a lawyer about undue influence. I didn't call her back. I sent the voicemail straight to the estate attorney I'd hired with the equity loan. A few days later, Aunt Martha called. She sounded tired. "Sarah's husband left for a hotel," she said. "He couldn't handle the phone calls from the neighbors, and Sarah, she's barely leaving the house. People are returning their RSVPs for her daughter's graduation party. They're saying they have other plans. In a small town, your reputation is your currency. Sarah had spent hers all at once, and now she was bankrupt. She had wanted a public victory, and she got a public exile instead. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt finished. A month later, I started the work. I didn't knock down the walls like Sarah wanted. I didn't sod over the garden. I spent my weekends stripping the old, floral wallpaper Mom had hated for 20 years but never had the energy to change. I painted the living room a soft, clean white. I fixed the porch light. I watered the roses Dad had planted, and by June they were thick with red blooms. I kept my job, or rather a new one. The bank manager had mentioned my attention to detail and persistence to a friend who ran a local insurance firm. I'm a claims adjuster now. It's steady work. It pays the mortgage. One evening, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea. The sun was setting, turning the street gold. I looked at the front door. I had changed the locks the day after the funeral, not out of spite, but because I needed to know that the only people who entered this house were people I invited. I'm 27 years old. My sister doesn't speak to me. Half my family thinks I'm a hero, and the other half thinks I'm a thief. But when I walk through my front hall, I don't feel like a tenant. I don't feel like a trespasser. I'm finally home. In the end, the house was just wood and nails. What mattered was the person standing inside it. My mother knew that the only way to save the house was to save the daughter who cared for it. If you've ever been the one holding everything together while someone else tries to take the credit, I want to ask you something. At what point does loyalty become a trap? When do you stop being a martyr and start being your own advocate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand your ground against a golden child in your family? If this story resonated with you, I have another one about a woman who discovered a 30-year-old secret in her father's attic just weeks before her wedding. You can find that link in the description. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about truth, justice, and family. It really helps us keep telling these stories.